Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Matt Chingos, and I direct the Education Policy Program at the Urban Institute, a nonpartisan research organization in Washington, D.C. I'm joined today by my colleague, Erica Blum, who's a research associate in our program. For more than a year, Erica and I have been working with our researcher colleagues, as well as Urban's Tech and Data Science team, on a project to bring together all of the major national data sets on K12 schools, school districts, as well as colleges and universities under one roof. Our goal is to standardize the data for consistency over time, to do once and for all the work that researchers, like a lot of the folks on the call today, I'm sure, have done many times over in bits and pieces. And as a result, to reduce the marginal cost of working with these data sets, so that researchers can skip the hours or days or maybe even weeks of data cleaning you normally do on a project with these data sets, and instead skip more to, I think, what a lot of us think of as the fun part of getting answers to our research questions. And as part of this, we're working to make the data accessible to a wide range of audiences. And we understand that different people come to education data with different backgrounds, different interests, different needs. So for that reason, we're putting together a suite of data tools that we hope will reach this range of audiences. So on one end of the spectrum, we have a set of flat files, which are big CSVs for researchers and other technically savvy users who just want to download the full data sets and kind of get right into it. Including panel data sets that cover multiple decades. I think a big advantage of what we've done is not so much enabling you to pull 1 year of data, although of course that's useful, but to be able to look at 5, 10, 20, or even 30 or more years of data in a way that's as consistent as possible over time as it can be. On top of this big database, we've built an application programming interface, an API, which is for developers as well as for our own in-house developers here at Urban to build other methods of accessing the data. And the first software packages we've used the API to build are Stata and R packages, so that researchers who are familiar with those statistical software packages can easily pull just the subset of data they want and pull it right into the software package that they're used to using. So that's all up in the current beta version of the portal now. And over the next year, we'll also be working to build a data explorer, which is more of a point-and-click type interface for general users, such as journalists, advocates, other folks who want to pull bits and pieces of data, but don't necessarily have the time, interest, or training to do the sort of more big data kinds of analyses. So I'm excited to share that we'll be able to share with you the API and Stata and R packages today. They include large chunks of data, mostly from the Common Core of data on the K12 side and iPads on the higher ed side. Over the next year, we'll be adding more data sets. We'll be adding the rest of Common Core and most of the rest of iPads. We'll be adding data from the Office of Civil Rights, from the College Scorecard, and we'll be building that point-and-click data explorer I told you about. In future years, we want to continue to add functionality to these tools, including more data sets, geographic links and shapefiles, features to the data tools such as user-driven data visualization, and think about building custom data tools with particular audiences in mind. So this afternoon, Erica is going to provide a 15-minute overview of the data tools to give you a sense of their functionality and how they work. Then we'll look forward to answering your questions. And at the end of the presentation today, we'll send out an email, we'll share the slides, as well as a link to a recording of this webinar. So once again, we're glad you could all join us today, and I'll turn it over to Erica.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. So as Matt mentioned, just a few housekeeping things quickly. Yes, we are recording the webinar. We'll send out the slides and the recording afterwards. And if you have any questions, feel free to type those in as we go. We'll collect them as we're going and answer them at the end. And you can do that in the questions box on the right. If you come up with more questions later, you can email us at educationdata@urban.org, and we'll share that email address again later. Okay, so I'm just going to walk you through our website and then spend a few minutes on the Stata and R packages that our team has developed. So when you first navigate to our website, which is educationdata.urban.org, you'll end up on this overview landing page, which gives you a little bit of information about this project, as Matt just told you about. And you'll also get a view of what our current data set sources are. As Matt mentioned, that consists primarily of the Common Core of data and the iPads data system, as well as some data from the Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates, or SAPI. If you scroll down, you can see that there are more data in the works. As Matt mentioned, more CCD data, more iPads data, the Civil Rights Data Collection, and College Scorecard. In future years, we are hoping to add even more data sets, so not just more education-related data sets, such as the college data from Raj Chetty's Equality of Opportunity Project and the Private School Universe Survey, but also geographic data, such as the EDGE data system from the ACS, and perhaps others as well that we're still exploring. If you navigate further down on the website, on the left-hand side, you can see that we now have some instructions on how to use this API, either via direct access, Stata, or R. So direct access gives you those instructions on how to access the data directly via your web browser. Or for most users, it's going to be much more convenient to use Stata and R. And so those packages are hosted on GitHub, and there's instructions for how to download those packages here and much more information on troubleshooting, examples, and lots more information on GitHub itself. And I'll spend a few more minutes on that at the end of this presentation. Okay, so where is the actual documentation? So if you navigate using the top right navigation bar, that's where you can navigate to the different topic areas. So the topic areas are schools, school districts, and colleges. That's how we've chosen to organize our data rather than by data set. It's then further subdivided into data sets within those. So here we're on the schools page, and you'll see on the left-hand side under CCD, it says directory, enrollment, enrollment broken down by grade and race, etc. Those we call endpoints, which are basically, you can think of them as data sets or sub-data sets, just chunks of the data that fall under CCD. So the other topic areas, as I mentioned, are school districts. So that looks very similar, again, with the endpoints on the left-hand side, which currently are data from SAPI and from CCD Finance. And then here's colleges, which looks, again, very similar. On the left-hand side, we have all the endpoints that we currently have from iPads. We'll be adding College Scorecard to that in the near future as well. So what does the data or documentation actually look like? Well, going back to the schools page, you'll see that that middle white section, you'll have all the information that you need on the variables that are contained in each of those endpoints. So you can access those either by clicking on the endpoints that you're interested in on the left, or just by scrolling down the page until you get to the endpoint you want. So in the middle of that middle section, or the left-hand side of that middle section, you'll see that we have the variable name and details listed there. So this, for example, is the urban-centric locale, and you'll see a little I button next to some of the variables, and that indicates that you can hover over or click on that button and get more information about the variable. So in this case, the variable changed its coding in 2005, and we give you a little bit of information about that. You'll also see that some variables have a little green filter tag associated with them. Those indicate variables that you can subset the data on, either via the API or in Stata or R. On the right-hand side of that middle section, we have all the label information. So the variable label, which here is degree of urbanization, and all of the values that the variable takes on. So here, large city, mid-sized city, et cetera. And then there's a little drop-down button so that you can see the whole list. On the right-hand side of the page, you'll see that we have 5 different buttons to get sample code and to download the data in CSV form, as Matt mentioned. So the 4 different code examples that we provide are Stata, R, Python, JavaScript, and then the downloads. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like, for Stata, it's really, really simple. It's just one line, and that's, again, because we've developed a Stata package that allows you to download these data with one line of code. R is pretty similar. It's a few more lines, but pretty much the same format as Stata. And then we have Python as well, and then JavaScript. If you click on the example response at the bottom of any of these little pieces of sample code, you'll see what the data look like. And these data come in JSON format, which, if you're not familiar with, again, that's why we have these Stata and R packages, so you can get the data in the more rectangular format that you're probably more used to. You can also navigate to the data directly in your web browser using the format topic area, data set, and then endpoint. And then you can also specify a year, as well as any filters based on those green filter variables. And then finally, our fifth option there is to just download the entire data set. So if you click on the Downloads button associated with a particular endpoint, you'll get the code book that's associated with that endpoint, as well as the data set or data sets that are associated with it. Okay, as promised, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about our data package. I imagine many of our listeners will be interested in that. And this makes it much, much easier to access these data and get at them really quickly. So as I mentioned, the data package is hosted on GitHub. The installation instructions are really easy. It's just one line using a net install command from GitHub. It does rely on libjson, an underlying package, but that will be installed automatically if you don't already have that installed. So that should be one-step installation. If you have any trouble, there's a lot of information on testing and troubleshooting on GitHub. We've also encountered some users who have faced firewalls when they're trying to use the net install. So there's also instructions for how to download the package as a zip file instead. If you're still encountering technical difficulties, you can email us at educationdata@urban.org. So a sample call in Stata, as I showed you, it can be really, really simple, just one line of code. So it can be simple as just this top line here. Education data using school CCD directory. So the syntax is always topic, source, endpoint. And again, an endpoint is sort of like a little sub-data set. So one of the sub-data sets of CCD in this case. You can also subset your data using those little green filter variables I pointed out. For example, here, maybe we're just interested in charter schools, so we can use the sub option to restrict to just charter schools. And we can also restrict to a single year or a range of years using that filter as well. So here are my data downloading. One of the nice things about this package is it will give you a time estimate and will tell you about how long it thinks it will take you to download these data. So there it is running. It looks like the first few endpoints it's hitting we're seeing 0 records. That's actually correct because there weren't any charter schools back in the 80s. But as we go through, we'll see that we're downloading more and more data. So it's finished, took a few minutes. But if you're downloading a lot of data, you might find that adding the CSV option to your call will make the call go much, much quicker. So that's just an option you can add to the data package. And all these options and documentation is all accessed via GitHub, or you can access it via Help Education Data just in your Stata window once you have it installed. So here are the data that you might be more familiar with if you're a Stata user. So here we've gotten our data. And one of the really nice things about this data package is it will label all the variables for you. So taking all that information from the documentation website that I showed you and applying those to the variables. And similarly, it will also label all the values for you. So there's our urban-centric locale again, labeled in blue. Just to give you a sample of what this might look like with a different data set, we're now going to download some data from iPads, the grad rates endpoint. And we're going to look at a specific university, unit ID 236948, which is the University of Washington, the range of years, and subcohort 2, which is the bachelor's degree subcohort. We've also added another option here. So if you decide you don't need all of the variables that are associated with a particular endpoint, you can restrict to certain columns or variables. In this case, we just grabbed year, race, sex, and the 150% completion rate. And there we've graphed the data. And we're going to move on to the R package. So this is very, very similar to this data package, pretty similar setup. The installation is maybe a 2-step installation for some people, so you do need the DevTools package. So if you don't already have that, the first step is to install that, and then installing the data package from GitHub. So similarly, it's a pretty simple syntax. So it's get education data. And again, we're going to break that down by topic area, data source, and endpoint. You can further break that down in some cases by things like race or sex. And again, you can add filter variables. And there's an option to add labels, which if you set that to true, you'll get all the labels associated with the data as well. So here's the same example I just walked through with this data package. So school CCD directory. We're going to filter on charter schools and a range of years. And there is R running and downloading the data. And similarly, the same example using iPads. So the college university, iPads grad rate, the filters, filtering on the year range, subcohort, and a particular unit ID. And again, adding, setting the add labels option to true. And there's that same chart as we just saw using this data package. And similarly with this data package, there's also a CSV option for R, just setting CSV equal to true. And so that should hopefully make your data download a little faster if you're asking for a lot of data, or you can just download those CSV files directly, whichever you prefer. So I'm going to leave you with our website here, which is educationdata.urban.org. Again, you can email us if you have any questions at educationdata@urban.org, or feel free to submit questions if you have them right now in the question box on the right.
Great. We've already had a bunch of great questions come in, and one thing I kind of want to emphasize is that we view this tool as being very much in beta mode. We're trying to do kind of a staged release of it with the idea that as more and more people use it, we'll be able to, correct any errors that are identified, squish any bugs. So if you see something that's not working, we really do encourage you to email us, because if it's an issue on our end, we want to know about it, and if it's not, then hopefully we can be helpful to you. So the first question we have is, do you have plans to make public or open source the code you use to collect these data? So it's a great question, and the short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is that I think sometime in the next, by the end of the year, it's our goal to make all the code open source and freely available. So that'll be Stata code, because we've done most of this work in Stata, that downloads data from websites, whether it's CCD or iPads or what have you, and then does the various cleaning and harmonizing that we've done to the data. And the idea is we want people to be able to see what we've done, certainly to tell us if you spot any issues. But we could also imagine a case where someone likes what we've done but would want to do something a little bit differently for a particular project, and hopefully that would enable folks to use the code that we've written, but to make tweaks for their own purposes.
We also had a question, do you adjust iPads data so it aligns when variable names or definitions change, and are we using the provisional data? So yes, so that's one of the tasks we spent a lot of time on, was trying to track all of these variable names and definitions over time and aligning them so that you just have one variable over time. We're using the revised data when it's available, and for the most recent years, it'll be the provisional release data until the new data are released, and then we'll update those with the revised data. So a related question about CCD, are they raw data, or have we done data cleaning or replacement? So again, we've done the standardizing of variable names and definitions and values if those change, but we haven't gone in and second guessed any of the data and replaced them with new values. So as much standardization and streamlining as is feasible without overwriting the raw data too much.
Great. So we have a question about how the district's data from Common Core that we're pulling together are different from the data collected made available through the Stanford Education Data Archive by Sean Reardon and his team. So I'll take a crack at this, and Erica, you can add anything if you know more. So I haven't taken a close look at the CETA data recently. My guess is that there'll be some overlap there. Part of what we're trying to do here is not so much that no one has done any of these data sets, but no one's done them kind of all at once and put them in one place. I think that's one advantage. A possible difference is my understanding of the Stanford test score data, which is I think the real value add of what they've done, is that they use geographic districts, including charter schools in those geographic districts, even if they're not politically part of those districts, whereas our district level data will just really be the straight files made available by NCES, where in some cases a charter school or group of charter schools would be a district. that align with your understanding?
Yeah, that's right.
So our next question is asking us to talk a bit more about some of the tools we use to build the website and collect the data, and what kind of database are we using to store the data. So I'm going to say a little bit about this and punt a little bit. Maybe Erica can fill in some of the gaps. So I would just kind of emphasize that this work has really been a collaboration with and made possible by the great tech and data science team here at Urban. So Erica and I are, researchers by background, are comfortable cleaning up these data sets, but it's really the folks in tech and data sets who built the databases, who built the API, and I'm not familiar with the details of the software they use to do that, but Erica, you work a little more closely with them. Is there anything you'd add?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't remember what software and programs the data science and technology teams use for this. But that's a really good question. But if you email us, we can definitely, and you're interested in those details, we can definitely get back to you with those answers.
And I guess I'd also make a plug for our Data at Urban blog, which is a blog from our tech and data science team that talks about a lot of the really interesting tech and data science things happening at Urban. And I think sometime in September, we're planning to do a couple of posts about this education data portal work that might get to some of those details. But that blog, even if you visit it now, I think it's available on Medium, would be able to give you a sense of some of the different kinds of software that our colleagues work with here. So our next question is about timing. Someone is working on a dissertation and wants to know when exactly some more of the IPEDS data is coming, in this case on financial aid. But Erica, do you want to provide a few thoughts on kind of approximate timeline for when we might put up some more data this year?
Sure. So certainly by the end of the year, we'll have the financial aid data and more of the IPEDS data. So I would say by the end of the year, we probably haven't decided if we're going to roll it out sort of piecemeal or in one big chunk, but expect it by December. Is there a way to access the CSV files together as a zip archive? So currently, no. That's something we can certainly look into if there's a lot of demand for that. I think it depends how big those zip files would get and what makes the most sense on our data side.
Yeah, I think one challenge with the CSV files, in some cases, they're just really big.
Yeah.
So in some cases where we can, we put the whole panel into one CSV file because we understand that makes things easiest. In some cases, we have to do it year by year. And I think one thing that's really powerful about the CSV option in both the Stata and R packages is it allows you to kind of bypass some of that. So, originally we imagined you'd use the Stata and R package to get sort of snippets of data, but it would be a really inefficient way to get full data packages because it would just take too long. It could take you days when you could just download a big file. Whereas that performance issue has really been resolved by the CSV option. So if you want to get 30 years of a file that we've posted year by year, I think the options would be to run it through the Stata or R package with that CSV option, or to write a loop in really whatever software packet, whatever programming language you're using, write a loop that would just get all those files. So we can think about whether there might be some better ways on our end to package those in some cases, but certainly I don't think we ever put all the CSV files into one thing because it would be gigabytes and gigabytes of data, and probably wouldn't, not sure who that would be useful for. So we have a question about, are we planning to add more filters, for example, a state filter for the Common Core of data?
That's a great question, actually. So if you go to the CCD data under directory, state should be a filter already, and if it's not, that's something we should correct. For the enrollment data, we don't currently have state filter on those data, but we're definitely planning to add that and other filters as well to some of the other endpoints that don't currently have those filters.
Yeah, and folks have ideas in particular. So basically the way the data are structured is that, each set of files is somewhat separate, and you can filter on not everything, but most every sort of categorical variable in those files. But we haven't replicated things like state across all of the files. So if you gave the Common Core example, in IPEDS, the directory file would be straightforward to filter on state, but everything else would not be. And as Erica mentioned, we're going to add stuff, and we're trying to figure out, obviously there's some trade-off in terms of we can't add everything to every file because it would be inefficient. But if there's particular things people think would be useful, feel free to send us an email with those, because that would be good feedback as we keep working on this. This is another question about states, is whether there's a plan to expand the selection to state level data as well. And I don't think it's an immediate plan, but something I think we're definitely thinking about as we build tools with these data. There's certainly state level data that are out there. You could also imagine rolling up some of the college, district, and school level data to the state level. I think the need for kind of an API and all this infrastructure is a little less strong because with states there's only 50 observations, but certainly given that we've built it for that other purpose, if there's a big audience out there that uses state level data, it's something we might think about down the road. So appreciate the suggestion. So I think this is another question about IPED's final provisional release, but I think we already answered that one. Eric, is there anything more we want to say about, is any of the data available from Urban cleaned in any sense? I think we talked about a bit that we've sort of made variable names consistent over time, but haven't cleaned it in the sense of, you know, flagging issues or correcting mistakes. When we found that in the documentation, we tried to include that in the tooltips and in other places. And as we continue to work on this, that's something else we'll keep adding, which is to try and make it, you know, on one hand, it's great to make it easier for people to work with these data. The potential downside of that is people could be working with data that they don't really understand because they haven't done the underlying work. So we kind of want to strike the right balance there by providing as much documentation as possible, but in a way that is really accessible to people, and you don't have to go into a 1,000-page PDF to find something. Because we know a lot of folks at the end of the day might not do it. So a question about the kind of some of the pros and cons of using these tools. Which is IPED's data, but we're using Zoom. What I see in IPED seems like it offers a similar option where you download their data into different formats and analyze with statistical software. So I think what differentiates this from some of the existing tools is that there are, you know, tools to use some of these different data sets. Some of them work better than others. And I think the real advantage here is to make it so that folks only have to learn one way of accessing all these data sets and to make it easier to kind of link across the data sets. So right now our college data is just IPEDs. As we talked about, we're planning to add the scorecard data, the chatty mobility data, potentially some contextual data from census tied to geography. So I think that's kind of the real pro here. If someone has, you know, if you as a researcher has already built a 30-year panel of IPEDs data that you know in and out, you're probably going to want to keep using that. So we see this as really kind of lowering the cost of entry to these data sets and making it easier to work across these data sets.
We have a question whether any of the data sets ask about sexual orientation and gender. Not that I know of yet. Maybe that will be coming in the future, but not any of the data sets we've worked on
and there's
yet.
some basic breakdowns of enrollment by gender using the two kind of traditional categories, but I think a lot of the federal data collection efforts have yet to catch up to the way that society has evolved on some of those issues.
If a variable has been discontinued a long time ago, will it still be included? So we did do a little bit of pruning. So if a variable existed in the 80s and then we never saw it again, we didn't necessarily include all of those. We're trying to maintain all the most recent variables, but not necessarily some of the ones that really only exist for a couple of years. Are all the data variables all labeled? Are there code books that can be downloaded? So yes, you can find the code books under the download option on the right-hand side of the documentation. And all the data variables are, in fact, or should be labeled. Let us know if you find any that aren't.
We have a question about the school and college identifiers that are included. Right now, we've included whatever identifiers are in the source data. So in the case of the Common Core of data, that would be the NCES ID, and then those often usually include a state, the ID for the district and school that's used by the state. For the IPEDS data, the unit ID is the main IPEDS data, but the OPE ID is in there as well. And I think as we start to add more data sets, we'll have to attend to kind of what the linkage between those is. Obviously, those mergers won't be perfect, and since people will be merging across data sets, we'll want to make this as useful as possible for folks who are doing that. So at some point, if we were to add data that classified schools by the College Board code, then obviously we want to think about including some way of crosswalking between the CEEB codes and either the NCS codes or the state codes or some other way of making that link. We'll be adding K12 test score data from NCES or individual states. So this is not in our kind of immediate coming soon set of data sets, but we definitely see the kind of test score data as an important source of information that people are using. Obviously, what Stanford has done has been a huge contribution to the field that relies on the EdFacts data from NCES. So we're actively exploring the right way to bring some of that into these set of tools without duplicating a lot of the great work that's already been done in the field.
Okay, so a question when the CRDC data will be available. So again, that timing should be the latest by the end of this year.
So I've got a couple questions about, how files get updated over time. So I think we're working to kind of keep track of the, when we pull the data and kind of versioning. So I would say that's something that we're kind of still in progress on, and kind of part of all this work to make the code open source, and will also involve putting that on GitHub and doing kind of more versioning that meets the kind of current standards in data science of how folks do that. So I think this will be kind of part of those efforts as well. And I think this probably is not, will be better documented in the future about exactly what versions of data are we using in this, when was it downloaded. You'll see in the current version of the data portal, we do have information on when we make updates and what changes are made. So I think we're going to be sure to keep doing that and make sure it's really clear, so that when people download data on a particular day, and then if they go back a year or two later and pull the data again and get different results, they'll be able to understand why maybe there was a difference. I think we're also thinking about what the right way, we haven't decided yet whether we're going to provide access to old versions of the data. I think there'd be value to it, but obviously there's a kind of an efficiency trade-off there in terms of this is a lot of data, and if every time we make a little change, I'm not sure if we'll be able to keep that, but perhaps for major releases we'll be able to do it. So who is your intended audience for this work? What downstream decisions would you like to see this data used to inform? So as I kind of touched on a bit in my overview remarks, we see there as being a range of audiences that can benefit from data. I think most of the folks on the call today are researchers of various types and various types of organizations that do research on schools and on colleges. We also think that, here at Urban, our kind of mantra is to elevate the debate. We think that policy decisions can be informed by data and database analysis and high-quality evidence. So part of what we're hoping to do here is, by lowering the cost of doing data analysis, we hope we'll see more data analysis, because people have to spend less time cleaning up iPads and cleaning up the Common Core, so that they can kind of get right to it. And part of what we do at Urban here is, in addition to kind of longer-term research projects that involve big data sets, often student-level administrative data sets, which are not part of this project, that take years to do, we also do sort of quicker turnaround analysis designed to inform policy debates closer to in real time, closer to when they happen, so that if there's a proposal in Congress to reauthorize the Higher Education Act, for example, that would change how, say, the income-driven repayment programs work, we can run some numbers to see how those changes would affect different kinds of students and different kinds of colleges and universities. So we'd like to see more of that kind of rich, useful, descriptive work in the field. And we're hopeful that if we make the data more accessible to people and lower the cost of working with these data, we'll see more of that kind of work. And as a result, we'll see data informing more decision-making at both the state and local level as well as the federal level. A question on timing on CRDC, probably a similar answer to the other question, which is fall-ish.
Yeah, late fall. Question about missing values. So we did try to standardize missing values across the different data sets, so that -1 is missing, -2 is not applicable, and -3 is suppressed data, which are maybe which tend to be the same values that NCES uses, but occasionally a little bit different. And if the data are just missing entirely, then we've left that as well and have not written over that with a negative value. In terms of early childhood data, we currently don't have any early childhood data, unfortunately.
It's not much. It's a little bit of pre-K enrollment data in the Common Core data school enrollment file. My understanding from my colleagues who are experts in early childhood education is that those data aren't very useful for a lot of purposes. Obviously, they only would capture early childhood enrollment in the public school system, which in a place like DC is a lot of it, but in other places isn't. So I do see that as sort of a big missing piece of this, but it's missing not because we didn't want to include it, but because there's not a lot of data available for the country in a way that's structured similar to kind of how we've put this tool together. So if any of the early childhood experts and researchers, on the phone today have ideas, please email them to us, because we're very keen to do more to include early childhood in this set of tools.
Yeah, the Office of Civil Rights Data also has some pre-K data, but definitely not as much as we might want. Our data geocoded for years where latitude and longitude are missing. So we haven't done that yet, but that's definitely something that's on our list that would be pretty feasible to do.
I would say more in general, this kind of first beta version is really just doing the best job we can to represent the data that exist as they were collected. And I think we're going to want to do a lot of kind of focused work on adding things like that, creating new variables that might be derived from existing variables. So for example, the sector variable in IPEDS classifies institutions as, say, 2-year or 4-year based on the highest degree that they offer. So a college in Florida that you might think of as a community college that grants mostly 2-year degrees, but does grant some 4-year degrees, IPEDS would call a 4-year college. If you ran the numbers, you might be a little bit confused by the results you got showing that there's no community colleges in Florida. So for some of our work at Urban, we've created a different sector variable that aligns with kind of how people tend to think of sectors in higher education based on where the majority of degrees are awarded. So right now that's not in the data, but that's the kind of thing we're going to be adding to this set of tools as we move forward, and being sure to make clear what's original to the data and what's derived or added or imputed.
There's a question about Ison, and we talk more about Stata and R instead of Python. So that's because we've developed actual packages for Stata and R. You can also access the API directly via Stata, but we found it was a lot more trouble, and it was much more valuable to have these packages to make it much easier. With Python, you can use that or other languages to access the API directly. I'm not a Python expert, but my understanding is that you can certainly use Python to access these data if you prefer to use that.
A question about adding FSA data for higher ed. So I believe that's referring to the federal student aid data. So I think it's put out quarterly, but there's also annual reporting on disbursements of grants and loans. So that should be pretty straightforward. That's on our list to do sooner rather than later, because I think it'd be valuable for a lot of the kinds of work we and others in the field do. How should we cite the data in Urban's Data Hub? That's a great question. I don't think we've provided a suggested citation, but it's something we could think about including on the website, because of course it's nice to get credit, but more than that, we want folks to know about these tools and to use them when they can be useful to them. So that's something we'll definitely think about. So I think that wraps up our webinar for today. So thank you all again for joining us. Once again, I want to encourage everyone to go and try out the tools for yourself. Nothing is behind a firewall or a paywall. Someone had asked me on Twitter whether we're planning to charge for this, and the answer is no, never. This is a public good, a public service that we want to provide to the field. But we do ask in return that you, if you can, help us make it better. Send us your questions, send us your feedback, send us your suggestions for future iterations. And afterwards, we'll be sure to follow up with an email with that information. But the two key pieces of information are the URL, which is educationdata.urban.org, and the email address, which is educationdata@urban.org. So thank you all again.